Hello, I'm Sarah Clark and I'm an advisory teacher with the Communication and Interaction team.
I'm Lucy Bomford. I'm a speech and language therapist and also an advisor with the CNI team.
So welcome to this short webinar outlining the tools available to schools to support possible identification of speech, language and communication needs. As part of your graduated response, you're required to identify language needs in your pupils. And this webinar aims to support you to do just that by taking a look at some of the tools we find useful in exploring children's language strengths and needs. The best place to start when considering possible language differences is by referencing the freely available Universally Speaking documents. You'll find links to all the resources mentioned today will be made available to you. These documents describe typical language development across the key areas. And when you understand what typical development looks like, it helps you better identify the differences. The purple booklet that you can see on the screen looks at children's development from 0 to 5, and the orange booklet focuses on the 5 to 11s. You can download electronic copies or you can order hard copies free from Speech and Language UK. So when you're thinking about potential speech, language and communication differences, it's important to consider all of the different skills that are involved. Does the pupil that you're thinking about have strengths or needs with play and interaction, or attention and listening, possibly understanding or using words and sentences, or perhaps difficulties with speech sounds, phonics or wider literacy difficulties? These checklists will help you consider the different areas and begin to create an initial profile of strength and need. And this is really important when you're considering appropriate provision moving forward. The checklists are best used in conjunction with the Universally Speaking documents, just to remind you about what's typical language development for the age of the child or the children that you're thinking about. And Lucy and I really like the Universally Speaking checklist that you can see now, because the prompts really guide and support your thinking. And you'll find this in the centre of the orange 5 to 11 booklet, or you can download it separately as a checklist on its own. So we all know and we're all aware that behaviour is communication, and it's often of an unmet need. So many children who have experienced developmental trauma or adverse child experiences, or are simply on your SEMH radar for other reasons, are very likely to have unidentified language difficulties. The tool that you can see on the screen now was developed by both the social, emotional, mental health and the CNI teams to support you to consider how social and emotional development, as well as language and communication development, progress. The tool highlights typical development across both areas. It's pretty self-explanatory to use, but in essence, you're asked to give background information about the child and their development, and then RAG rate each of the statements to show how secure the child is presenting in these different areas.
So we're moving on now to look at some tools that you might have in school, you might purchase. And the first of these is Speech and Language Link. You'll remember that Speech Link is specifically for children where you've got concerns about their speech sounds, and the Language Link is for concerns around understanding of language. So Language Link is a really excellent tool, and it looks at specific areas just of understanding. So it's a really useful tool to have in your box. We would really encourage you to look closely at the results for particularly children that you are concerned about, because the Language Link looks at an average across the different areas of language. So there may be a green result saying that the young person doesn't need any intervention, but there could be one particular area that's very difficult for them. It's really important not to ignore that. That might be the key to what you're noticing is difficult for them in the classroom. So really look carefully at those results, particularly for children that you were concerned about. And if your professional judgment is actually something's not right with the language, do continue your investigations, because Language Link is a really brilliant tool. It's looking at very specific areas of understanding, so there may be other parts of language that need investigation and could be the stumbling block for that particular pupil. You will be familiar with the blank levels, and you may have children who've had a programme from the speech and language therapy team where they're working on those, but there's a really easy to use tool that you might have in school or perhaps across your trust called the TALC, the Test of Abstract Language Comprehension, which will help you to identify if there are any gaps in that understanding across the 4 levels, from the concrete moving through to the more abstract. It takes about 20 minutes to administer this tool, which has a series of pictures, and you ask questions at the 4 levels, and you can then identify whether competency, which is 80% success, has been reached at each level. So a really useful tool that may already be around at school, or perhaps your colleagues have available, and that's from ELCLAN. This is a resource that Sarah and I have used a lot with many schools, Language for Behaviour and Emotions, and it links into what we were talking about just before, about that huge link between the language skills that we need and our ability to understand emotions, regulate emotions, and also interact successfully with other people. So this book is suitable for young people 9 and above, and it's not only an assessment, it's also a resource for intervention as well. And you can see on the screen here the 3 areas that they recommend starting with, which is an assessment scenario where you read out some information and ask the pupil questions. There's a young person's view of their own communication skills, a RAG rating tool that they might need some scaffolding and support from you to complete, and then a similar document for an adult, the person that knows that child best, to complete around their communication. On the basis of those 3 assessments, it might point you to additional assessment tools and also give you some really useful guidance around planning intervention for them. So a very useful tool. And you may have come across the Communication Trust speech, language and communication progression tools. These are available to buy as a set. The primary set goes right from 3 up to 11. It's an assessment tool, it's not an intervention, but it looks more deeply at a broader range of areas, including sentence structure and narrative skills, social communication and vocabulary. So for those children we were talking about earlier that perhaps the Language Link hasn't picked up any areas of concern within those language, but you're concerned, this could be a really useful next tool to look into what might be going wrong for them. And it's 2 parts, a part that you use with the children, they sit down with you and do a sort of assessment, but also a matching for each area of language. There's a matching observation part, so you can get a really good view of what they can do one-to-one, and also functionally how they're getting on in those areas of language in the classroom. And as you can see on the screen, there's then a profile chart where you can rate how they've got on, and it will give you a red, amber, green rating. And this can be repeated after some intervention, so it can be a useful part of your outcome measurement. We hope this has been useful for you, and you are ready now to go and do some intervention, do some investigation of language need. We have a second webinar to support you with that post-assessment provision planning.